Ugly men get beautiful women every day. And before you say money, status, or looks, no. Because attractiveness has almost nothing to do with being attractive. The things you've been told to fix are the last 10%. The other 90% is something you've probably been destroying for years without realizing it. You've spent years doing it wrong. And the most painful part isn't that you failed, it's that you were trying. Genuinely, sincerely, embarrassingly hard. You read the books, watched the videos, memorized the openers, practiced eye contact in your bathroom mirror like you were preparing for a TED talk, and somehow, the guy who did none of that walked away with the woman you spent 3 weeks building the courage to text. That's not bad luck, that's information, and it's been trying to tell you something you weren't ready to hear. So here is the 90%, not as a concept, as 4 specific things that were either quietly working for you or quietly killing you this entire time. And by the time we're done, you're going to look back at every woman you lost and finally understand what was actually happening. Let's start with confidence. The word every dating coach hides behind because it sounds profound but means absolutely nothing. You heard it so many times it stopped registering. Be confident, walk confident, text confident, breathe confident, and so you tried. You stood straighter, spoke slower, held eye contact a beat longer than felt natural. You did everything the videos told you, and somewhere in the middle of all that effort, you looked up and realized you were more in your head than ever before. More anxious, more calculated, more aware of how you were coming across than anything actually happening in front of you. But that's the trap nobody warned you about. The moment you start performing confidence, you've already lost it. Because confidence was never something you switch on. It's something that leaks out slowly, quietly, from a man who has already settled the question of who he is. Not who he's trying to become, who he actually is on a random Tuesday when nobody's watching and nothing's on the line. But here's the question most men have never seriously sat with. Who are you when she's completely out of the picture? No outcome to chase. Just you, alone, with your own thoughts. What do you genuinely care about? What gets you up before your alarm? What would you walk away from, even if walking away cost you the girl? Most men go blank at that question, not because they're shallow, but because somewhere between trying to be what women want and trying to be what the world expects, they forgot to figure out what they actually want. The identity got swapped out for the pursuit, and now there's no real center. Just a man orbiting whatever woman currently has his attention, quietly adjusting his personality based on her reactions, laughing a little too hard, agreeing a little too fast, shrinking just enough to keep the peace. And she feels every single bit of that, not consciously, not like she's running a checklist, more like how you can tell instantly when someone's laughing at your joke because it's funny versus laughing because they need you to like them. You just know. The energy is different, and so does she. Before you finished your first sentence, before you've done anything technically wrong, she already knows whether there's a real man in front of her or just someone auditioning for her approval. Psychologist Jennifer Crocker spent years studying men who tied their self-worth to external validation. The pattern was consistent: more anxiety, worse relationships, less genuine connection. They were hollow at the center, and hollow reads to everyone around you as instability. And instability is the single thing she's filtering for without even knowing she's doing it. The man who wins isn't the most polished in the room, he's the most settled. The one who walked in already knowing who he is, so he has nothing to prove, nothing to perform, and nothing to lose. You can't fake that, but you can build it. And it starts the moment you stop trying to become attractive and start figuring out who you actually are when attractiveness isn't the goal. You didn't know that at 22. Most men don't figure it out until they've lost enough to finally stop and ask the right question. But you're asking it now, and that's further than most men ever get. There's a guy you've probably been in the same room with at least once. Maybe a party, maybe a work thing, maybe just a random social situation where you weren't paying attention until suddenly you were. Because something shifted, not dramatically, nobody announced it, but the energy in the room quietly reorganized itself around this one person. Conversations tilted in his direction. Women who were mid-sentence with someone else started glancing over, and he wasn't doing anything. That's the part that got you. He was just there, drink in hand, completely unbothered, not performing relaxation, actually relaxed, like the room needed him more than he needed the room. That's presence. And it has nothing to do with being the loudest, the best looking, or the most interesting person there. It's something quieter than all of that. And it's the second thing that was either working for you or working against you every single time you walked into a room full of people. Here's what presence actually is and what it isn't, because this is where most men get it completely wrong. You walk into a bar, you spot her, she's exactly your type, and immediately, before you've taken 3 steps, something happens inside you. A switch flips. You become aware of yourself in a way you weren't 2 seconds ago. You're suddenly conscious of how you're walking, whether you look casual enough, whether you should smile now or later, whether she noticed you noticing her. Your drink becomes a prop. Your posture becomes a decision. You are no longer a man in a bar. You are a man managing a performance. And the performance has one audience member. That right there, that switch, that's the moment presence dies. Because presence isn't about what you do when you get there. It's about what you don't do. It's the absence of self-surveillance, the absence of that little internal camera that follows you around asking, how am I coming across right now? Most men have that camera running on full broadcast 24 hours a day and have no idea it's visible from the outside, but it is. It shows up in the eyes, that slightly unfocused, slightly calculating look of a man who's half in the conversation and half watching himself have it. It shows up in the laugh, just a half second too eager, just a fraction too loud. It shows up in the pauses, the ones where a grounded man would just let silence breathe, but you rush to fill because silence feels like losing. She's not analyzing any of this consciously, but her gut is cataloging every single bit of it. Now flip it. Same bar, same woman, but this time you walk in and you're not thinking about her at all. You're thinking about whatever you were thinking about before you got there. You grab your drink, you find your people, you laugh at something genuinely funny. You're not scanning the room, you're just in it, fully. And at some point, naturally, your paths cross. And when they do, you're not performing a version of yourself, you're just yourself, unedited, unmanaged. And that unmanaged quality is so rare that it registers like a signal flare in a dark room. This is what researchers call self-monitoring, the degree to which a person regulates their behavior based on how they think others are perceiving them. Social psychologist Mark Snyder studied this for decades and found something that should genuinely bother every man who's ever overprepared for a date. High self-monitors, men who are constantly adjusting, performing, reading the room, and recalibrating, consistently underperformed in genuine attraction contexts compared to low self-monitors. Men who just showed up as themselves, took up their natural space, and never once checked whether it was landing. The irony is almost funny. Almost. The men trying hardest to attract were the least attractive. The men barely trying were magnetic. And the difference wasn't looks or money or any of the things you've been told to fix. It was just how much of themselves they were managing in real time. So here's the uncomfortable question. How much of yourself are you managing right now? Not just with women, everywhere. With your friends, with strangers, with people whose opinion of you shouldn't matter but somehow does. How much energy are you burning every single day, maintaining a version of yourself that you think is more acceptable than the real one? Because that energy has a cost, and the cost shows up exactly where you don't want it to, in every interaction where something real could have happened but didn't, because you were too busy directing the scene to actually be in it. Presence isn't built in a day, but it starts the moment you catch that internal camera running and consciously, deliberately turn it off. Not forever, just long enough to remember what it feels like to just exist in a room without needing the room to validate it. And when you get that, when you actually get it, not as a concept but as a feeling, everything changes. The way you enter a conversation, the way you hold eye contact without it feeling like a competition, the way you can sit in silence with someone and have it feel like connection instead of awkwardness, all of it shifts because you're finally taking up the space you were always supposed to take up. You just spent years apologizing for it instead. Think about the last time she pulled back, not broke up with you, not ghosted you completely, just cooled. The text got shorter, the energy dropped a degree. She stopped initiating, and something inside you felt it immediately, like a barometer dropping before a storm. You knew something had shifted, you just didn't know what. So what did you do? If you're being honest, and this is the part that stings, you pursued. Maybe subtly, Maybe you told yourself it wasn't pursuing, it was just checking in. You sent the casual text that wasn't casual at all. You brought up plans. You were suddenly more available than you'd been all week. You smiled a little harder when you saw her. You were warmer, funnier, more attentive, because some part of you thought that if you just turned the dial up high enough, the temperature between you would go back to what it was. It didn't. It got colder. And you stood there genuinely confused, because from where you were standing, you did everything right. You showed up, you made effort, you cared. What more could she possibly want? Here's what she wanted, and this is the third thing, the one most men spend their entire lives never figuring out. She wanted to see what you do when things get uncertain. Not what you say, not what you plan, what you do when the ground shifts and the outcome isn't guaranteed and everything in you is screaming to fix it. Because that moment, that exact moment when she pulls back and you feel the panic rising, that is the most revealing thing that will ever happen in an attraction dynamic. More than your looks, more than your status, more than every good date you ever took her on. That one moment tells her everything she needs to know about who you actually are under pressure. And most men fail it, not because they're weak, because nobody ever told them what it was actually testing. What it's testing is emotional composure, the ability to feel the uncertainty fully without flinching and not let it drive your behavior, to sit in the discomfort of not knowing where you stand and remain somehow exactly yourself. Not cold, not distant, not performing indifference like a bad actor in a worse movie. Just steady, grounded, the same man you were before the temperature dropped. That is genuinely one of the rarest things a woman will ever encounter in a man, because the world does not produce emotionally composed men at scale. It produces men who are either shut down, walls up, nothing gets in, nothing gets out, or men who are wide open and completely at the mercy of whatever the woman in front of them is feeling. Both of those are easy to read. Both of those are unattractive in their own specific way. The shut down man feels safe, but dead. The wide open man feels warm but unstable. What she's actually looking for, what she's always been looking for, is the third thing. The man who feels everything and is moved by none of it into behavior he'll regret. That man is almost mythological at this point, but he exists, and you've probably met him once or twice without realizing what you were looking at. Here's what he looks like in practice. She cancels plans last minute. He says, "No problem," and genuinely means it, then goes and does something he actually enjoys. She sends a short, dry text after a great night together. He reads it, puts his phone down, and doesn't pick it back up for 3 hours. Not as a strategy, but because he has a life that doesn't pause for ambiguity. She tests him, and every woman does, consciously or not, by introducing some friction, some uncertainty, some moment designed to reveal whether his sense of self is actually his or just borrowed from her approval. And he passes. Not because he's playing a game, because he was never destabilized in the first place. That's the thing about emotional composure that nobody explains properly. It's not about being unbothered. You're allowed to be bothered. You're human. The composure isn't in the feeling, it's in what you do next, whether the feeling drives the wheel or just rides in the back seat. Now, back to you in that moment, standing there, watching the temperature drop, feeling the panic rise. Here's what emotional composure actually looks like in that specific situation. You feel it. You acknowledge it internally. Yeah, something shifted, and that's uncomfortable. And then you do the hardest thing a man can do in that moment. Nothing. Not cold, nothing. Not passive-aggressive nothing. Just, you continue being yourself. You don't dial up. You don't chase. You don't send the, "Hey, everything okay?" text that you already know is going to make things worse, but sends anyway, because the discomfort is unbearable. You just hold. And in that holding, in that refusal to be destabilized, something interesting happens. The dynamic shifts back. Not always, not guaranteed, but far more often than pursuing ever produced, because what you just demonstrated without saying a word is that your sense of self doesn't live inside her approval, and that, more than anything you could have said or done, is what actually pulls her back in. The men who figured this out late always say the same thing. They wish someone had told them earlier that the panic they felt when she pulled back was never about her. It was about them, about how much of their stability they had quietly outsourced to her presence. And the day they took that stability back, stopped needing her reaction to know they were okay, was the day everything changed. Not just with her, with every woman after. There's a version of you that existed before all of this, before the advice, before the strategies, before you started reading her texts like they were encrypted government documents trying to figure out what okay actually means. A version of you that had opinions he didn't apologize for, that walked away from things that didn't feel right without needing to justify it to anyone, that knew, without having to think about it, what he would and wouldn't accept from another person. That version of you was more attractive than anything you've built since, and somewhere along the way, through bad advice, through heartbreak, through the slow erosion of trying too hard for too long, you talked yourself out of him. That's what self-respect actually is. Not arrogance, not ego, not the performed version where you pretend not to care while desperately caring. Real self-respect is just a man who knows his own value without needing anyone to confirm it. A man who has standards not because he read somewhere that standards are attractive, but because he's actually thought about what his life should look like and refuses to accept less. A man who, when something feels wrong, says so, not aggressively, not dramatically, just clearly, like it's the most natural thing in the world, because for him, it is. Here's what that looks like in a real moment, and pay attention here because this is the scenario most men handle completely backwards. You're seeing someone, things are going well, or so you think. Then she does something that bothers you. Maybe she cancels last minute for the third time. Maybe she says something dismissive. Maybe she makes a plan and then quietly unmakes it without mentioning it, and you feel it. That small but sharp thing in your chest that tells you this isn't okay. But then the other voice kicks in, the one that's been running the show for years, the one that says, don't make it weird, don't be that guy, just let it go. She might pull back if you say something, just be cool. So you swallow it, you smile, you say no worries when you have plenty of worries, and she watches you do it. And something dies in that moment. Not dramatically, she doesn't suddenly hate you, but something shifts in how she sees you, because what you just showed her without a single word is that your comfort is negotiable, that your boundaries have a price, that she can do that again and probably worse, and you'll absorb it to keep the peace. And women do not feel safe with men whose boundaries dissolve under mild social pressure. Not because they're cruel, because safety, real safety, requires a man who actually holds a line, a man whose no means no and whose yes means yes, and whose that doesn't work for me comes out calm and clear and completely non-negotiable. You know what's funny? The men who speak up, who say calmly and without drama, hey, that's not okay with me, are almost never punished for it the way they feared. More often, something unexpected happens. She respects it. The dynamic sharpens. She starts showing up differently. Not because you dominated her or passed some test, but because you just proved you're a man who has a self worth protecting. And that, to a woman who has spent her whole life around men who fold, is genuinely refreshing. This is what the whole 90% comes down to when you strip everything else away. Identity, presence, emotional composure, self-respect. They're not four separate things. They're four expressions of one thing. A man who is fully, unapologetically, consistently himself. Not performing, not managing, not shrinking, not chasing. Just occupying his own life so completely that there's genuine substance for someone else to be drawn to. That's the guy the ugly man actually is, by the way. That's the secret you've been circling this entire video. It was never about his face. It was never about what he said, or how he said it, or which opener he used. It was that he walked into every room already full, already complete, already enough, not because someone told him he was, but because he decided he was. And that decision, made quietly and repeatedly over time, became the most attractive thing about him. The thing nobody could name, but everybody felt. You spent years chasing the 10%. The looks, the style, the perfect text, the right move at the right moment. And none of it worked the way you needed it to, because the foundation wasn't there. You were decorating a house with no walls, but you're not that man anymore. Or at least you don't have to be. Because now you know where the actual work is, and it has nothing to do with her. It starts with you, alone, deciding, maybe for the first time, who you actually are, what you actually stand for, and what you absolutely refuse to keep accepting. not for her, not to become more attractive, just because you're finally done being a smaller version of yourself to make other people comfortable. Everything else, the attraction, the respect, the kind of relationship you actually want, that's just what happens when a man stops performing and starts being. You don't become attractive by trying to be attractive. You become attractive by becoming someone you'd actually respect. Start there. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, hit subscribe now and I'll see you in my next video.